If you want action, if you want answers, it's time to get results with Richard Rice.
Welcome to the show. This is Richard Rice. This is Results with Richard Rice. This is our first show, so we're excited. I'm in the studio today with Rhonda Robinson and Martin Weinberg, and looks like we're going to have a good time. We got some exciting, some interesting information for you all. Hopefully can introduce you to a topic that you're familiar with and also add a new perspective on it. And that's what we're going to be doing every week here on the show, is basically taking a look at legal issues from a community perspective to try to gain a broader perspective and a more proactive, approach to some of the legal issues that we're facing. So how are you doing today, Martin?
Good. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you're doing this show. I'm looking forward to it. Always enjoy working with Rhonda, and this topic that you're discussing is so timely. I saw today there was AL.com did a study on what issue mattered most to folks in the elections.
Right.
And public corruption and ethics was number one. So I think you're hitting the nail on the head with this, and just appreciate you doing this, and congratulations for starting your show.
Hey, man, thank you. I really appreciate that, Martin, and thanks for joining us. Definitely looking forward to having this conversation with you. Public corruption is a big issue, and then when you take public corruption and then combine it with these environmental issues, it's a pretty serious issue, and it's something that's ongoing. And really, the only way that we're going to be able to do anything about it in terms of addressing it and cleaning up the issue is that we can continue to have these types of conversations to continue to build awareness, because this is an issue obviously that's been going on for several years now. And specifically, we're speaking about North Birmingham and Tarrant, the Superfund site. There was Oliver Robinson, a state legislature, who pled guilty to basically bribery charges, and then ended up testifying against executive with Drum and Cole, and also two attorneys with the local law firm, Balch and Bingham. And in that particular case, Oliver Robinson was pled guilty to basically using his office to take the position of Drum and Cole, basically to prevent that Superfund site from being expanded, and also to prevent the North Birmingham community from being added to a national priorities list. And essentially with the Superfund site, what that includes is basically the EPA would designate contaminated areas as a Superfund site to expedite the cleanup process, right? And after they begin the cleanup process, then whatever responsible parties who have contributed to that pollution would then reimburse the EPA. And so to avoid potential liability, Drum and Cole basically hired a local law firm who then created this agreement with Oliver Robinson to create a campaign around preventing that very thing from happening.
Right.
Right. And so the trial recently concluded, maybe 3, 4, 5 weeks ago now?
Right. About a month ago.
About a month ago now, the trial concluded with one of the attorneys being dismissed on some type of technicality, but with the other two defendants, the executive and the other attorney, were convicted on 5 charges, all stemming from bribery. And as I stated earlier, Oliver Robinson had pled guilty. And so now we're in this situation where this public corruption has been exposed. We know what the issues are, but what are some of the things that you think the public needs to know about this, Martin? Like what are some of the things that we want them to begin to know so that we can
I think you're right. I mean it's unique that the criminal trials happened and you had guilty pleas. I mean, this is very systemic.
Right.
It touches on so many different issues, not just the public corruption, but environmental justice, environmental racism, issues that as we both are civil rights attorneys,
right.
That we recognize it's pretty complex, in that the long-term damage that some of these folks are having, we don't have any idea, because we don't know, what they did was they actually succeeded. A lot of times when you're talking about criminal cases or, those sort of things, folks are in trouble because they get caught, right? Or, they're not successful in what they do. So, but these folks were essentially successful, in my opinion, in what they did because they kept Birmingham and North Birmingham and Tarrant communities from being added to the Superfund and the MPL designation, which means that, if they would have gotten added, there would have been more testing, more, regulations and regulators in town to kind of just to figure out what had been going on.
Right.
So they essentially didn't want to spend the money, is what it comes down to. They figured, okay, we can spend X amount of dollars to keep them from doing their job, essentially.
Right.
And I think, folks that live in those communities, they need to be aware that, there may be long-term, property damage, health problems, and just to reach out, let us know if there's something we're missing. I mean, this thing is so documented in terms of the trial that concluded and all the information that was shared. We're learning stuff every day we get into it. And folks are talking about what happened in Flint, Michigan with the water. The more I research this and the more I get into it, I mean, I realize it's very similar in terms of, and I don't know all about, I mean, this has been going on for years and years. And I know Flint had too, in terms of just kind of the cover up and that sort of thing. But we don't know. The problem is we don't know exactly what the long-term consequences are because they did what they intended to do, essentially.
That's true. That's a very good point. I'd like to invite our listeners to call in. You can call in at 205-941-1011 or 1-866-551-9933. And we're going to continue this conversation, as you stated, Martin. I mean, these individuals were successful in their campaign. Basically, they convinced local residents by using not only a state legislature but also local nonprofits such as the NAACP as well, and other individuals who had some type of stature in the community to convince residents that it would be against their interest to have their soil tested.
Right.
Which would have been, if the soil would have been tested, then that would have been more proof or evidence that could have been used to have the Superfund site expanded or to have the actual 35th Avenue Superfund site added to the national priorities list. And this was taking place in the previous administration. And so now that, we're under a new administration, there not as big of an emphasis, I would say, maybe to focus on these types of things. And so these individuals were very successful. And so it's a difficult thing to begin to piece together a way to bring about justice on an issue like this, because as you mentioned, I mean, there's obviously the property damage, the lower property values based on the contaminated area, but there's also all different types of health concerns as well, from respiratory issues, all different types of carcinogens as well. So it's a problem that's ongoing with the contamination, and also from a legal standpoint, it's how do you put the individuals who live in these communities back in the position they would have been in but for this corruption?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's so unique because, we've talked about, had these conversations about different high-profile environmental cases, and, everybody's aware of, Aaron Brockovich and, in Anniston there was Monsanto where there was PCBs and the and what was that John Travolta movie, Class Action.
Right.
The difference with those is that they were taking action against the companies. They figured out that there was a pattern of the pollution or whatever they were doing that was leading to cancer or blood diseases or whatever that happened in that. The problem in this is that we just don't know because the government got involved.
Right.
When I say the government officials got involved to keep them from being able to go in and test. In these other cases, the EPA or whoever else, the regulators were able to do their jobs.
Right.
But, I mean, we're talking about a conspiracy where folks got involved to prevent them from doing their jobs so that, now we don't know. I mean, they could have already. We're 3 or 4 years behind,
Right.
Maybe permanently behind, because, like you said, these mechanisms may not exist with the current administration. I mean, they may come back, but other people got into that. I mean, that was money that was designated not just for Birmingham, but for other areas where they were doing cleanup. So, that pot shrunk.
Right.
So, what they did is, to me, is one of the worst in terms of corruptions that we've seen, because it's preventing them from it's government officials preventing entities and stuff from doing their agencies from doing their job.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree with you. And again, I'd like to invite the listeners to call in 205-941-1011 or 1-866-551-9933. Today on Results with Richard Rice, we're discussing North Birmingham and Tarrant, the 35th Avenue Superfund site, and the surrounding public corruption and bribery associated with that. And joining me, we have Martin Weinberg, who is a civil rights attorney here in Birmingham, and also Haley Colson Lewis is joining us, and she is a staff attorney with local nonprofit GASP. Welcome to the show, Haley. How are you doing today?
Thank you. Good. How are you?
Good, good. We appreciate you joining us. I know you were just getting back in the town from a trip this weekend.
Yes, I was.
That's good, good. So we've had kind of general conversation about the public corruption involved with the 35th Avenue Superfund site, but I'd like to hear your perspective. I know GASP is been involved with this really from day one, and we were just having a conversation about, how do we begin to put the individuals that live in those communities back in the position they would have been in but for the corruption. It's a very difficult thing to try to quantify, but that's kind of, the task at hand for us. And so I'd like for you to just kind of give some general thoughts on just, how this corruption prevented GASP, a 501c3 specifically set up to be an advocate for environmental justice issues, how your efforts were frustrated, and then just some of your thoughts on what do you think the next steps should look like.
Okay, so I guess I'll start with what GASP was doing at the time and how the corruption affected our work. So we're a 501c3, we're a membership organization, so the actions we take are on behalf of our members. And so a lot of our members are in the northern Birmingham communities, and a lot of them are leaders in their communities. So our group worked alongside those residents and leaders to advocate for what we thought would be positive solutions. Now, we are a group that focuses on air quality, so most of what we work on and advocate for is going to be to improve the air quality or to address air pollution. And EPA, I believe Martin was already speaking about what EPA was doing in the northern Birmingham communities. But there had been a documentary series on CBS 42. It was called Delhi Deception. And if you just Google it, you can find it if you're interested in watching it. I think there were 2 or 3 installments of it. And that got the attention of EPA, in addition to some of the local leaders, state legislators, council people. And so EPA kind of came in and started doing some emergency cleanup that you'd normally have to go through other steps to get to. So as part of that, GASP became a resource partner to community groups over there. We assisted residents with air pollution concerns, helped them advocate for things that were happening. And one specific thing was EPA wanted to list the site over there on the national priorities list. That would have opened up a lot more funding. It would have given a clear path towards cleanup, and it would have enabled EPA to hold accountable some of the potentially responsible parties, which that just means all the taxpayers of the entire U.S. would not be paying for all the cleanup, but the companies would have to contribute. And GASP, we wrote comments on the list, and
We're going to continue that thought when we come back from a break. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Results with Richard Rice, a Carmine Communication production.
Welcome back to the show. This is Results with Richard Rice, and before the break, we were speaking with Haley Colson Lewis a little bit about the Superfund site, just the process of potentially responsible parties and how they, have so far with the 35th Avenue Superfund site really haven't shared in the burden of the cleanup costs just yet. And so go ahead and continue with your thought that you had right before the break, Haley.
Right. So we were organizing the community. We were submitting comments on the listing, which any action you can comment on it. And we had no idea what was going on at the time. We had no idea there was this very sophisticated, orchestrated effort to combat listing the site on the NPL, as we call it. So 2 years later, we found out about all of the corruption, and we've been digging through trial documents and seeing exactly how it was executed. And I think we're realizing a good first step is trying again to get the site listed. And several elected officials have stepped out in support of the listing, which I think it's important to highlight that, because one of the problems with the corruption is the entire state and almost every elected official was opposed to it. So getting people, decision makers, on board now is an important first step.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, and so at the time when, in this 2014, 2015 time period, many of the state agencies responsible for regulating these type of issues were also in agreement with Drummond as well. And so has anything happened? I mean, I'll put this question to you, Haley, and also Martin. Like, what's your confidence currently in these agencies to stand with the communities of North Birmingham and Tarrant? How do you see that playing out now?
So I'll just speak from my personal experience over the past 4 years working on these issues. Is my confidence was not high in these agencies to begin with, and specifically the Alabama Department of Environmental Management would be the agency that was tied up in all of this. But my confidence wasn't high. I had a feeling that they were more sympathetic to industry than they were to residents, but this just confirmed all of that. So unless there's policies that come out to correct some of what happened, unless there's some people that resign, it would be hard to think that anything has changed. Right.
I mean, what are your thoughts, Martin? Do you think it's more of bad actors, or is it just more flaws in kind of the way that the system is working?
I think it's a combination of both, because I think that unfortunately, like you said, the administration has changed, and so not necessarily in Alabama, because we're still dealing with the same players in terms of ADEM and other entities. But nationally, then EPA and federal regulators, I mean, we've got an administration that was, one of the more progressive that we've had in decades, if not ever, in terms of a lot of the social justice issues we've had versus, one of the most I guess, just not qualified to run whatever agency. I mean, whatever it is that, we've got so much turnover, not, because everything's changed, like I said, I mean, it accomplished what it set out to do, because, I mean, it just delayed it. I mean, by delaying it, a couple of years, I mean, a new administration came in that, they're not dedicated to the funding and just the overall principles of environmental regulation. I mean, we've got folks in charge who don't think we should have any regulation, pretty much in terms of environmental issues and justice issues. So I think it's just everything kind of came together. I don't think anybody could have predicted that, because if we'd have had a different administration in place now, what results would – so – had they still done what they did, and then, Hillary Clinton wins, for example, or Bernie Sanders, anybody that besides Trump, we'd had a totally different EPA, and they, may have had more, without a doubt, there'd be more funding for Superfunds and NPL. And I don't know exactly how much money they've cut from that, but, I mean, I'm sure it's not what it was. and so that's a major concern. So the timing was just, perfect for what they were doing. But it says a lot that they still went through with the prosecution and did it. That it wasn't. We have to commend the law enforcement and justice folks that were involved to stay on this, because
Definitely.
it wasn't it wasn't partisan at all, because you had a lot of folks that are on both sides of the aisle. And that's what I always tell folks, regardless of what the issue is. Corruption is, Democrats and Republicans doing it. And they often come together. Politics makes strange bedfellows. This was a combination of folks that they were just in it for the greed.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with you. And it's one of those things where, like you said, one of the bright spots is the way that the U.S. Attorney's Office really prosecuted this case. They obviously did a great job. They were very successful. Just the overall strategy and being able to obtain the guilty plea initially from Oliver Robinson, that was obviously an intricate part of the trial, and having him be a key witness and being able to obtain 2 convictions as well on all counts. So, that was something that was very positive. And then, of course, for the jury to be able to sit through the trial, which was maybe, 6 weeks or so, and to be able to process the information is can be somewhat technical. Some of the points were, but they all did a very good job. So I think it is important for us to kind of lift that up and put that example out there as kind of the system working as it was intended to. But at the end of the day, still, individuals that are living in North Birmingham and in Tarrant are still, living in the same exact conditions. And as you stated several times, Martin, Oliver Robinson and the executives at Drummond and Balch, they were successful. They were successful in perpetuating this issue. And so, I guess, there's the issues in North Birmingham are very similar to Tarrant, Haley, but there are some distinctions. Would you care to speak about that a little bit?
Yes, I was actually going to ask to distinguish the two.
Yeah.
And then even we got to separate Inglenook out from
Right.
Tarrant, because that is a neighborhood of the city of Birmingham, but it was lumped into the same study area as Tarrant. So what happened was December 1st of 2014, GASP submitted a petition to EPA asking them to go into Tarrant and investigate. And anyone has the right to do that, and EPA can choose to do so or not. And what maybe you've seen this referred to in the media would be they were expanding the 35th Avenue site, which is a little bit of an oversimplification, but it works because they were studying the soil over there. So part of what Oliver Robinson was tasked with doing is creating a very sophisticated outreach campaign, especially within Tarrant and Inglenook. And what their goal was to create community buy-in. So you convince people that their property value is going to decrease if the EPA comes in and does any cleanup. And go even further than that, I've seen literature that says your entire neighborhood will become a dump site and things like that.
Right.
And so there were people on the ground knocking on doors. Mm-hmm. There were people on the ground going to community meetings. And the neighborhood of Inglenook, not a single sample was taken in Inglenook, even though they were part of the study area. So it's become very clear to me they were probably one of the more maligned communities when it comes to this action, because the misinformation was so sophisticated and the organizing was so sophisticated that this particular community really just never even got a chance to have the information they needed or to get their soil tested.
I know, man. This is like a case, a textbook example of how to manage a PR campaign. And it really is a testament to the value of organizing. I think sometimes we dismiss that, and maybe even as lawyers or litigators sometimes, obviously we have an important role to play in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. But it just shows you that, so much of the work that's kind of our responsibility to do goes beyond the courtroom. And, to be able to go out and organize in these communities and even, operating this fear campaign and misinformation, it was executed like to a T perfectly. Yeah, and it's something that we should really all learn from, so we'll be aware, to be able to spot it in the future. And it really is a testament to organizations like GASP to be able to kind of, to stick to your mission and, against opposition, such as the opposition that you faced. And so we only have a few more minutes left on the show, and so I really would like to give each one of you an opportunity to just tell the listeners, some of the things that you believe they should be doing right now. If they live in the impacted area, or if this is something that they're passionate or concerned about, what are some things that you would ask them to do at this time?
Yeah, I would say just contact us. Get in touch with Richard or one of us if you know us through Facebook or call our office. But and Richard, just give your number for the folks for them to call you and just discuss this, and still trying to formulate what can be done and what options there are for folks. But when you talk about corruption, in government, agencies, or we've had all these convictions, and now the governor, Mike Hubbard, and they were charged with using their office for personal gain, and it may be measured in thousands of dollars or a few $100,000, but we're dealing with, we don't know what the damage is to folks, and so right. There could be long-term property, emotional, physical, all other long-term health concerns, educational concerns, anything, health, breathing air, any of that stuff. So just contact Richard or get in touch with one of us, and we'll let you know what options we think there are.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, you can reach me. The number is 205-618-8733. That's 205-618-8733. And Haley, I mean, I'd like to hear your comments as well. What are some things that individuals can do to support GASP and to support the residents of North Birmingham and Tarrant?
So, like I mentioned, GASP is a membership organization. So if you are a part of any of the communities we mentioned, please join GASP as a member. The three of us on staff have the luxury of this being our full-time job. So we can do in the 9 to 5 hour what your everyday resident doesn't have time to do. And that's the beauty of nonprofits. And also, I would like to mention there is an opportunity right now, especially if you live in Tarrant or Inglenook, where the ABC Cokes air permit is up for public comment. The health department regulates air in Jefferson County, and they're taking comments until November 15th. And there will also be a public hearing on November 15th, and this is an important way to weigh in on how air pollution affects you.
Great. Thank you for the comments. I really appreciate each one of you being on the show. Martin Weinberg, thank you for joining us, and Haley Colson Lewis, thank you so much. This is Results with Richard Rice. We want to thank everybody for listening in, and I want to invite you to tune back in next Sunday at 3 o'clock, where we'll be back again speaking about stand your ground laws here in Alabama. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Results with Richard Rice, a Carmine Communication production.